Welcome freebies to episode 26. Super Tuesday was this past Tuesday, and what is hopefully Biden's last State of the Union is tonight. So we'll talk about the Super Tuesday results, Trump, Nikki Haley, Joe Biden, and Michelle Obama. Plus, the Supreme Court is under fire this week. We'll talk about why. Do we need more or less people on Earth? We'll answer that and more today. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's content, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you were meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt, and of course, the classic We the Free crest tee. We've even got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle. That's right. So check out our new merch at wethefreeshow.com. Before we get to the news today, I have to tell you about the presidential playoffs going on right now. It is March, and March is when we have college basketball's March Madness, and people all over the country are filling out their predictive brackets on who they think will win and lose in the tournament. Well, I decided to create a bracket of U.S. presidents. I'm just doing this as a poll on social media. I'm at Mr. Blake Watson. So these are my friends and followers voting which president they would choose, which one's their favorite. No, I'm not going to do all 46, so I picked what I think is a fair Sweet 16 for the first round. I picked 16 presidents and then randomized who would go against who so as not to be biased. So in round one, there were 8 total matchups. So here are the Sweet 16 winners in the presidential playoffs. The first matchup, and again, this was totally randomized, was Joe Biden versus Ronald Reagan. Reagan absolutely trounced Biden. That's no surprise, of course. The surprising part is that there were people who actually favored President Biden over Ronaldus Maximus. Now, here's the thing. I'm able to see who votes in my polls. Nobody else can see it. So I can tell you that the ones who voted for Biden were just young and stupid. I'm sorry, but these are the facts. The universities have served them really well, as you can tell. So yeah, just send your kids off to college, everybody. But this is the reason why Biden somehow managed to get 5% of that vote. The next matchup was Teddy Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower. Teddy Roosevelt beat Eisenhower with 74% of the vote. Roosevelt was a wild dude. He was a big conservationist. You can thank him for the national parks. He was big on opposing monopolistic business. He was also the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But Eisenhower created the interstate highway system. He ended the Korean War. He pushed for peace during the Cold War. He established NASA. He appointed the Chief Justice, Earl Warren, who essentially desegregated our schools. And he was also extremely fiscally conservative. Like, he had balanced budgets every year, and low spending, and lower taxes, etc. So I was honestly surprised that this was such a defeat from Teddy, but Teddy is definitely painted as a cooler and more intriguing figure in American history. So he advanced to the Elite 8. Next was the other Roosevelt, FDR, versus Barack Obama. I honestly didn't know how this one would turn out because they were very similar in how socialistic they were and how much they both bloated the government beyond belief. So I thought it would be close, though, just based on that. But FDR came away with 87% of the vote, just crushing Obama. What's funny is that the same people who picked Biden over Reagan picked FDR over Obama. That doesn't make a lot of sense because Obama was like the liberals' dream, and FDR he has the horrific stain of rounding up over 100,000, I think it was like 120,000 Japanese Americans during the Second World War, stripping them of their civil rights and putting them in internment camps. And talk about xenophobia. But despite that, I voted for FDR because Obama was such a blatant neo-Marxist. Next, Trump defeated Andrew Jackson. Now, this was no surprise, but again, the surprise was that Jackson earned 22% of the vote. These were the same snowflakes who just hate the evil orange demigod. However, in the world of loony birds that we live in, the same people who voted for Biden voted for Andrew Jackson, who was practically tyrannical, exerting his power over that of the legislative branch and the judiciary. And have you ever heard of the Trail of Tears? Like, you know, where the Native American tribes were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands? I thought you libs cared a lot about that sort of thing. Also, a huge proponent of slavery, Jackson was. But yeah, Trump is real bad and mean. Regardless, most of you had the sense to vote for Trump, so he advances. The closest matchup was George W. Bush and Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson. With Jefferson walking away with the victory, thank God. Again, this amazes me. We're talking about a founding father, the writer of the Declaration, the Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark, religious freedom, accomplished architect, reduced government, foreign neutrality, versus a fabricated war on terror, which cost the United States $8 trillion and thousands of lives. And don't get me started on the terrible No Child Left Behind Act, which has obviously served our country so well since 2002. Anyway, Jefferson was the victor there with 61%. In this next one, I fully expected Lincoln to demolish Woodrow Wilson. Wilson created the Federal Reserve. He was probably the first president seeking to tax the rich, if you want to say it that way, by federal income tax. Of course, as a way of helping the lower class payers. Under his presidency, women gained the right to vote, the 19th Amendment. He led the country through the First World War, but he was a huge racist. He segregated the government. He didn't support civil rights. He didn't renounce lynching. He silenced anti-war activists through legislation. But more importantly, the other person was Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator whose declaration, the Emancipation Proclamation, paved the way for the abolition of slavery and the 13th Amendment. He united the states, the United States. His leadership during the Civil War was unmatched. His Gettysburg Address is a fundamental moment in American history concerning liberty, equality, and national unity. Not to mention, he was an amazing man of faith, a wonderful Christian man who may very well have been our first president of color. Yeah. But once again, the irony here is that the liberals voted for Woodrow Wilson over Lincoln, a blatant racist, over someone who literally freed the slaves. And that's why Lincoln got 91% of the vote. Another close matchup was Ulysses Grant and James Madison, with Grant being the victor there. This one was hard for me. I thought it would be closer than it ended up being, but Grant won 70% of the vote. James Madison was a founding father. He was the foremost responsible for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But Grant's presidency saw Reconstruction after the Civil War, the passage of the 15th Amendment, which gave blacks the right to vote. He pursued peace with Native Americans. He went after the KKK. And it's kind of a big deal that he was the commanding general over the Union Army during the Civil War. So he won the majority and advanced. And finally, George Washington, in this last matchup, slaughtered Bill Clinton. Still, though, I'm astounded that Bill Clinton got 6% of the vote. And you guessed it, by the same libs who voted for Biden and FDR and Jackson and Bush and Wilson. Listen, I don't have to explain this one to you. This was the founding father versus Young Smoothie, and I can't say his other nicknames on the show. And while Clinton would be a Republican by modern standards, George Washington led the Continental Army to defeat the British in the Revolutionary War. He was unanimously elected our first president, and he presided over the creation of the Constitution, our federal system, the Bill of Rights, and the federal government. The point is, this was a no-brainer, which is why Washington got 94%. But still, I'm dumbfounded as to how much of these minority votes were cast in all of these matchups. And then it dawned on me that I have learned more American history, just history in general, outside of the public school system than at any time. And I'm saying as an adult. I didn't learn most of what I've just told you, K through 12. But colleges are undoubtedly Marxian towards authentic American history, rewriting the past, corrupting legends, and promoting losers. That's why you see statues being torn down and defaced. Everything is upside down and backwards. But alas, there is yet hope because the Elite Eight is next. Take a look at this bracket. Reagan takes on Teddy. FDR faces Trump. Jefferson is up against Lincoln. And Grant matches up with Washington. So head over to my Facebook or Instagram. It's at Mr.BlakeWatson, Mr.BlakeWatson, to vote today. You only have one day to participate in the Elite Eight. So what are your predictions? Who's going to win the presidential playoffs of 2024? Let me know in the comments. Speaking of presidents, as you know, Super Tuesday happened this week as 15 states and 1 U.S. territory held primaries and caucuses, during which almost 900 delegates, 900 for the Republican Party, were up for grabs. Well, as expected, it was almost a clean sweep for President Trump, winning every state with the slim exception of Vermont. Put him right up to the threshold of the necessary delegates to win the nomination. He's now about 200 delegates shy of the 1,215 needed for the convention. And we still have 9 or 10 more states this month. We have 6 in April, we have 6 in May, and the final 4 states are in June. So with this commanding lead, we have virtually entered the general election. And as of yesterday, this is even more the case. As I correctly predicted, Nikki Haley suspended her campaign for president Wednesday morning. We're going to play what she said in full, so just take a listen.
Just over a year ago, I launched my campaign for president. When I began, I said the campaign was grounded in my love for our country. Just last week, my mother, a first-generation immigrant, got to vote for her daughter for president. Only in America. I am filled with the gratitude for the outpouring of support we've received from all across our great country. But the time has now come to suspend my campaign. I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets. And although I will no longer be a candidate, I will not stop using my voice for the things I believe in. Our national debt will eventually crush our economy. A smaller federal government is not only necessary for our freedom, it is necessary for our survival. The road to socialism is the road to ruin for America. Our Congress is dysfunctional and only getting worse. It is filled with followers, not leaders. Term limits for Washington politicians are needed now more than ever. Our world is on fire because of America's retreat. Standing by our allies in Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan is a moral imperative. But it's also more than that. If we retreat further, there will be more war, not less. As important, while we stand strong for the cause of freedom, we must bind together as Americans. We must turn away from the darkness of hatred and division. I will continue to promote all those values, as is the right of every American. I sought the honor of being your president. But in our great country, being a private citizen is privilege enough in itself. And that's a privilege I very much look forward to enjoying. In all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee when our party convention meets in July. I congratulate him and wish him well. I wish anyone well who would be America's president. Our country is too precious to let our differences divide us. I have always been a conservative Republican and always supported the Republican nominee. But on this question, as she did on so many others, Margaret Thatcher provided some good advice when she said, quote, "Never just follow the crowd. Always make up your own mind." It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away. And our conservative cause badly needs more people. This is now his time for choosing. I end my campaign with the same words I began it, from the book of Joshua. I direct them to all Americans, but especially to so many of the women and girls out there who put their faith in our campaign. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for God will be with you wherever you go. In this campaign, I have seen our country's greatness. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, America. God bless you.
I just want to say thanks to Nikki Haley for finally suspending, but I also want to say that I agree with most of what she said there. However, you can't call people to unity while you refuse to support the party's presumptive nominee. It is your job to mobilize your support base into the fold that everyone else finds themselves. It is what Vivek did, it's what DeSantis did, it's what you should have done, but congratulations on second place. Now, as I was saying, we've practically entered the general election season with the anticipated rematch of Biden and Trump, but I still think that the DNC will dump Biden at their convention this August, or sooner. I'm not the only one that thinks this, and it's honestly common sense when you read stories like the following from Politico. Now, this is just one headline and news story among many like it, but this is one from Politico. It's called 4 Reasons the Latest Polls Are Awful for Biden. Kelly Garrity wrote this. A day after Democrats dragged a New York Times Siena College poll that showed the president falling 4 points behind his likely Republican opponent, former President Donald Trump, in a general election matchup, Sunday brought an additional 3 major surveys also showing Trump leading amid broad and deep dissatisfaction with the incumbent, meaning Biden. And when it comes to Trump, many seem to have abandoned misgivings they had about him during his time in office or during his tumultuous exit. So Politico is writing this piece about 4 different surveys which serve as humongous red flags to the Democrats and libs. And these concern issues with mock election polling, where Trump is polling ahead of Biden in almost every single national survey. These have to do with Biden's ability, or lack thereof, and also the shift on the narrative regarding Trump. In other words, this is terrible news for the Democrats. That's why a media outlet as liberal as Politico is sounding the alarms. Here's what they reported. Voters continue to be troubled by Biden's age and perceived acuity. 45% of those who responded in the New York Times Siena poll said that Biden's age is such a problem that he is not capable of handling the job of president. I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it, but Democrats are experts at projection, where they'll take some flaw and insufficiency about themselves and project it onto us. Like, I was reading some of my comments from this past week where people were blaming Trump for all the things that Biden has in fact done. But here's another example of this. Politico cites this information about Biden's age and mental acuity, and then they project saying, despite Trump's own mix-ups and misstatements, in North Carolina on Saturday, he referred to the president as Obama. And the fact that at 77, he's not even 4 years younger than Biden, more than half, 55% of those in the Times poll said they somewhat or strongly disagreed that his age made him ineffective or incapable of carrying out the duties of the presidency. Now, there's a big whopping difference in getting Biden's name wrong one time and not being able to get through a coherent sentence or stand on your own 2 feet. There's a reason why on Tuesday night, Biden didn't even appear in front of the cameras on Super Tuesday. But Politico is baffled as to how the survey participants largely felt that Trump was healthy for the job, despite being close to Biden's age. In Sunday's CBS News YouGov poll, 45% said only Trump was physically healthy enough to serve as president, compared to 17% who said only Biden was. So that was all concerning age and mental acuity. Now on to the economy. Despite months of good economic news and a long-shot soft landing from post-pandemic inflation, Americans can't seem to shake the feeling that the economy is in rough shape. Nearly 3/4 of those in the Times poll said the economy today is in poor or only fair shape, while 26% classified it as good or excellent. It's pretty simple, but I guess I have to explain it to the liberal 26%. Everything costs more, okay? It's harder for average Americans to make ends meet. It costs them more to drive to work to earn less money to pay for more expensive things. But when you live in the liberal bubble, the fantasy land, numbers like this don't make much sense. Really though, the bad news that they're trying to cover up is that they know that this is Biden's fault. It's 100% his fault. Immediately upon his entrance to office, Biden took a sledgehammer to America's #1 breadwinner, oil production and oil companies. And then magically, lo and behold, gas got more expensive and diesel got more expensive. That means the farmer has to pay more, which means the shipper has to pay more, which means the grocer has to pay more, which means that you have to pay more. And when you have to pay more, there's less money in your pocket. America is suffering greatly from that single policy by itself. And don't think for 1 second that it's ignorance. It's absolutely intentional, and I'll prove it to you in the weeks to come. It's what they said they would do. They said that they would do this. But Politico continues on their bewilderment on the economic reaction. In the CBS News poll, 57% said the current conditions are very or fairly bad. Despite a pandemic-induced crash during Trump's final year in office, 65% remember the economy under Trump as being very or fairly good, while only 28% remember it as being very or fairly bad. And those 28% are probably people who read your articles, Politico, and watch CNN, where they're lied to about Trump's time in office on an hourly, weekly basis. Trump is, in fact, correct when he talks about his administration creating the greatest economy in American history. That's why most remember it being good. Because guess what? Things were cheaper. It was easier to live financially. People had money in the bank. Gas was significantly cheaper, etc., etc. It's not rocket science. And they even inadvertently blame the pandemic as the reason for any economic downturn in Trump's time in office. But now they move on to immigration. And so you're starting to see what the most important issues are in this piece and in this election. The top issue for voters in the Wall Street Journal poll was immigration. 20% picked it when asked for the issue that most comes to mind for their 2024 presidential vote, more than the economy, which was 14%, or abortion at 8%. Though Biden has escalated his rhetoric on the issue, punting the blame on congressional Republicans who recently blocked a bipartisan border bill, voters still seem to believe that Trump would do more to stem the flow. Yes, Biden, blame the Republicans for blocking your legislative Band-Aid, when in fact the immigration crisis is directly attributable to your policies. You wanted it to be this way. You got what you wanted, tens of millions of unknowns that can be leveraged for political power. But now that it's come back to bite you, your false humanitarianism has vanished, and everything is your opponent's fault. See what I mean by projection? They caused the problem, and we're blamed for it. And of course, Donald Trump would stem the flow because he's already done that. And he was very, very effective at it. That's why he was ridiculed and labeled a racist and dragged through the mud for, putting kids in cages, despite the fact that it was President Obama who created such containers. Take a look at this graphic from Pew Research. April of 2020, Trump's last year in office, was one of the lowest years on record for migrant encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border, with only 16,000 encounters that month, April of 2020. Now, look at the end of the chart on the right. That's December 2023, just this past December, which saw just shy of 249,000, 249,735 migrant encounters just in that month. And who was president then? Oh yeah, that's right. It was Joseph Robinette Biden. Politico continues on this subject. 45% of those who took the CBS News survey consider the situation a crisis, and half think a second Biden term would mean an increase in the number of migrants coming over the border. Meanwhile, 72% think a second Trump term would result in a decrease in migrants attempting to cross the southern border. Well, that's encouraging to know that the majority aren't that stupid on this subject, but the writers at Politico aren't a part of that majority, unfortunately. Here's what they said next. Half of respondents said they strongly or somewhat support making it harder for migrants at the southern border to seek asylum in the United States. That is not the issue, libs. We're not talking about legal immigration. We're talking about illegal invasion. Criminals and thieves are flowing into our country, practically unhindered, to pillage our country. And you fail to see reality. Now, the last part of the article talks about these mock election polls. Like, if you were to vote today, who would you vote for? Look at the conclusion. Trump beat Biden in a head-to-head matchup in all four of the major polls out this weekend, but by only a few points. This is why I think that Biden has to go for them to be able to win. In regard to that, though, one of the rumored replacements all along put those rumors to rest this week. Michelle Obama is not going to sub in for President Biden, the Washington Examiner reported. Former First Lady Michelle Obama confirmed that she will not try to return to the White House, putting the rumors that she could replace President Joe Biden as a presidential candidate to rest. The Obama's office stated, as former First Lady Michelle Obama has expressed several times over the years, she will not be running for president. Ms. Obama supports President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris's re-election campaign. Now again, I think the only plausible option for the Democrat Party is to embrace Robert Kennedy. But I doubt they'll listen to me, just little old me, and they may have lost their chances because it looks like this week RFK will be running as the Libertarian Party candidate. Well, let's get to the news feed. Speaking of the election, the Supreme Court is usually a slow and deliberative group, as should be the case most of the time. They are the only court created by the framers of the Constitution, and their job is to adjudicate cases of great national importance weighed against our foremost legal authority, the United States Constitution. Now, of course, they take into great consideration the national zeitgeist, if you will, but ultimately, the job of the 9 justices is to search America's legal Bible, the Constitution, to reach their legal decisions. That's first and foremost. But there are tens of thousands of federal laws in the U.S., all of which are drafted by some Congress at some point. SCOTUS, or the Supreme Court, searches these and determines their constitutionality when reviewing whatever their case is. And they take individual state laws into consideration as well when necessary. So, obviously, the legislative branches, federal and state, are responsible for creating our laws, but the judicial branch, the highest of which being the Supreme Court, essentially creates case law, which are basically laws established by their decisions instead of by legislative action. So there's 2 things that we can take away from all of this. First, 9 justices of the Supreme Court have mountains of material to consider, the foremost being the Constitution. But secondly, they reserve this awareness of their judicial power that when they make rulings, they effectively create legal precedent or case law. In other words, one court ruling can effectively rule in future cases. For example, this is why liberals are gravely concerned about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Justice Thomas cited several cases, like Roe, which ruled from the given court's understanding of both the 5th and the 14th Amendments. He said Griswold v. Connecticut, which created rights to contraception. Lawrence v. Texas, that was having to do with homosexuality. And Obergefell v. Hodges, which paved the way for same-sex marriage. Justice Thomas was alluding to all of these cases when he said the court needed to reconsider all of the substantive due process precedents. Now, this is getting a little deep. We're not going to get too deep into this, but I just want you to understand some of how the Supreme Court operates as we talk about their critical ruling concerning President Trump on Monday, just one day before Super Tuesday. This specifically had to do with the state of Colorado attempting to keep Trump off of the primary ballots under the guise of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that Trump was guilty of insurrection, thereby disqualifying him from running again. The state of Maine and the state of Illinois were trying to disqualify him as well with respect to this so-called insurrection he committed. So what happened? The Daily Wire reports the Supreme Court issued a ruling on Monday that determined the state of Colorado cannot remove former President Donald Trump from the primary ballot using Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. All 9 justices agreed with the decision. That's a huge deal that it was a unanimous decision. And this serves as the biggest blow to the weak legal reasoning in barring him from running for office again. Harmeet Dillon's law firm represented President Trump in this case. Here's what she had to say. Today's unanimous Supreme Court decision underscores the bedrock principles of our democracy and the rule of law. This victory is not just for President Trump, but for the integrity of our electoral system and the rights of voters across the country. The attempt to use the 14th Amendment in this manner was a dangerous overreach that, if left unchallenged, could have set a perilous precedent for future elections. We're proud to have defended the constitutional rights at stake and grateful for the Supreme Court's unequivocal affirmation of these fundamental principles. The irony in all this is that liberals have this steady drip and drumbeat of labeling Trump as a threat to democracy, right? While they literally attempt to undermine the democratic system of voting. And if I may say, just as a side note here, this just really bugs me, okay? America is not a democracy. We are a constitutional, democratic republic. The United States is incredibly unique in our governmental system, which the brilliance of our founders continues to demonstrate. We elect by democratic means people to represent us, and all of us are subservient to the Constitution. That's why, for example, our politicians, they place their hand on the Bible and swear in their oaths of office to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And even in our democratic elements, these powers are extremely regulated and restrained. That's why we have proportional representation in Congress. It's why we have the Electoral College. Pure democracies can give birth to tyranny in an instant with a flip of a switch. That's not the United States. But I digress. This ruling, as mentioned earlier, creates legal precedent which protects the democratic election process. It ensures the American people that they may vote for whomever they wish. And it protects candidates from the technical lynching of their opponents. It safeguards free and fair elections, which is supposed to be a hallmark of America on the global stage. So, after all this, here's what Trump had to say after the ruling.
I want to start by thanking the Supreme Court for its unanimous decision today. It was a very important decision. We're very well crafted, and I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the leading candidate, whether it was the leading candidate or a candidate that was well down on the totem pole. You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well. And I really do believe that will be a unifying factor, because while most states were thrilled to have me, there were some that didn't, and they didn't want that for political reasons. They didn't want that because of poll numbers, because the poll numbers are very good. We're beating President Biden in almost every poll. New York Times came out yesterday with a very big poll for us. So they didn't like that, and you can't do that. You can't do what they tried to do. And hopefully Colorado, as an example, will unify. I know there's tremendous support. They brought our support up very strong in Colorado, because people in Colorado thought that was a terrible thing that they did. And while we're on the subject, and another thing that will be coming up very soon will be immunity for a president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president, because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions, and they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office, or even before they leave office.
As you just heard Trump mention, the Supreme Court is not done. They've decided to adjudicate on the issue of Trump's claim to presidential immunity from prosecution regarding January 6th. You can expect some action there towards the end of next month in April. Last week, we spent a good deal of time talking about in vitro fertilization, bioethics, and Christian morality. If you missed episode 25, I recommend you go back and listen or watch. But the episode touched on another subject quite a bit, and that's because the two subjects are almost inseparable and intertwined, and that is IVF and abortion. These procedures both murder innocent children. And that's part of the reason why we spent half an hour explaining all of it. But I also talked about the fact that Republicans were walking straight into a trap by coming out guns blazing in support of IVF. When the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that embryos are children, it effectively gridlocked pregnancy centers and IVF clinics all over the state that do that procedure. And Republicans lined up to rebuke the ruling, including Donald Trump. Trump and others talked about how IVF creates families, so we don't need to hinder it. Yes, well, it also murders millions of children in the earliest stage of their lives. Because as we talked about last week, 80% of these embryos are never used. They're indefinitely frozen and ultimately destroyed, meaning they're killed, they're murdered. The Democrats came out in full swing against the ruling because it completely undermines their case for abortion. Their goal with all the abortion talk has been to dehumanize the baby from the very beginning. It's just a clump of cells. That's not a person. Well, a case about embryos being destroyed landed in the Alabama Supreme Court, and they ruled these are, in fact, lives created at conception. So Trump and the other Republicans are just blindly supporting another wing of the pro-death cult, the medical industry in IVF. Now, Tommy Tuberville, former head coach of the Auburn Tigers and current senator for Alabama, was asked about this. Here's what he said.
Do you have a reaction to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on the fact that embryos are children?
Yeah, I was all for it. We need to have more kids. We need to have an opportunity to do that. And I thought this was the right thing to do. But
IVF is used to have more children, and right now IVF services are paused at some of the clinics in Alabama. Aren't you concerned that this could impact people who are trying to have kids?
Well, that's for another conversation. People need to have that. We need more kids. We need the people to have the opportunity to have kids.
Senator, what do you say to the women right now in Alabama who no longer have access to IVF, or who will not, as a result of this ruling? What do you say to them?
Well, that's a hard one. It really is. It's really hard. Because, again, you want people to have that opportunity. And that's what I was telling her. We need more kids.
Now, CNN was playing that clip to make fun of Tuberville, like he didn't have any clue what he was talking about. And I'll say this, he should have been a little better prepared to answer for something like this. And it perfectly illustrates how inept these politicians are on this particular subject. But he said he was all for the ruling. Okay? He was all for the ruling, which disabled IVF treatments in his state. But he also said we need more kids. Everyone has taken this to be a contradiction, like he's contradicting himself. When the reporter questioned him on this seeming contradiction, he doubled down. IVF bad, kids good. He was questioned again about women not having access to IVF, and he responded that it's a hard one because you want people to have that opportunity. So let me help the libs out once again, okay? Millions of children who are created through the process of IVF will be aborted, frozen, and destroyed. Infinitely more children are murdered by IVF than are created by IVF. Okay? Are you with me so far? The other issue here is population decline, which is a very real thing. America is a dying civilization because we're not having enough children. Look at this story from Reuters on Japan's birth rate. The number of babies born in Japan fell for an 8th straight year to a fresh record low in 2023. Preliminary government data showed on Tuesday, underscoring the daunting task the country faces in trying to stem depopulation. The number of births fell 5.1% from a year earlier to 758,631. Like, that's how many people were born. While the number of marriages slid 5.9% to 489,281. The first time in 90 years, the number fell below 500,000. foreboding a further decline in the population as out-of-wedlock births are rare in Japan. Asked about the latest data, Japan's top government spokesperson said the government will take unprecedented steps to cope with the declining birth rate, such as expanding childcare and promoting wage hikes for younger workers. The declining birth rate is in a critical situation, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi told reporters. The next 6 years or so until 2030, when the number of young people will rapidly decline, will be the last chance to reverse the trend. Mindful of the potential social and economic impact and the strains on public finances, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has called the trend the gravest crisis our country faces and unveiled a range of steps to support child-bearing households late last year. Elon Musk is one of the foremost critics of depopulation, which has been the trend for so long. Now, here he is talking about this very subject.
No, we have an underpopulation problem.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
So this is the most commonly misunderstood situation.
Yeah, they definitely push that we have a overpopulation.
Yeah, why is that?
No, I don't know. It's just like, I think it's like, this is a holdover from like, I don't know, the 70s or something, you know? So there was a huge baby boom, like where people did have a ton of kids after World War II. But then the U.S. has actually the birth rate in the U.S. has been below replacement rate since like 71 or 72.
In the U.S.,
like 50 years.
How about
50 years,
other
the U.S.
countries,
has been below replacement rate.
I know U.S., but how about other countries?
Well, like China's got a huge population collapse problem.
Really?
Yeah.
China, you actually get penalized if you have more than one kid.
No,
are you being serious?
No,
they cut that off.
No, see, this is like, so part of it is just like, we're operating on things that were true in the past, but are no longer true. So China did have a one-child policy, but like about 10 years ago, they changed it to a two-child policy. And then a few years ago, they changed it to a three-child policy, and birth rate kept plummeting the whole time. So they had the lowest birth rate ever last year.
Really?
Elon Musk is somewhat of a smart guy, you know, a successful businessman, and one of the wealthiest people on the entire planet. He's not making this up, and he's a person that recognizes problems and desperately seeks solutions. Hence, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, etc. Now, I thought we should bring in another expert on the subject. Here's Joy Reid reacting to Tommy Tuberville's saying we need more kids.
The United States has a population of north of 327 million people. Why do we need more kids? I mean, your party, Senator Tuberville, is the one screaming that 10 million immigrants, which I don't even know that that number even makes any sense because it doesn't, have streamed into the country since Joe Biden has been president. And you're claiming that that's too many people, that if more people come into the southern border, this is some sort of crisis because we've got too many people and we've got no more space and we can't afford more people. But now you're saying we need more kids?
So Joy, donning her white woman hair again, says we don't need any more kids. So, you know, let's just kill them off. Now, of course, the joyless Reid had to also make this issue about race. That's what she has to do with everything. It's got to be boiled down to some sort of race problem. So watch what she said.
There was a time when the state of Alabama absolutely needed more kids because, you know, Alabama was a slave state. And the mandate of the planter class in Alabama was for black women to produce more kids because those kids were property. And they could work more kids and make more money on their plantations. Are you saying the state of Alabama needs more kids because you think that those populations will include people who are maybe destitute and desperate enough if you kick out the immigrants like a lot of y'all want to do and you could make them do the work that the migrants are doing now?
Just listen to that brilliance. Well, I just want you all to realize how important this issue is because of its relationship to the issue of abortion. This is an election issue this year. And all of this is happening while France becomes the first country in the world to codify abortion in its constitution. And as mifepristone, an abortion drug, becomes available over the counter in Walgreens and CVS all over the country. Now let's end on a good note today. I think we all need that. Jennifer Jeffries is a 17-year-old from Starkville, Mississippi. She was just on American Idol and sang her own song for the judges. Take a listen.
I've got a Bible on my desk with no highlights or creases. Oh, pages are still crisp. I had this idea, Miss Independent. Oh, that's who I am. Just watch me excel. Well, I'm falling fast, too fast to catch myself. Miss Independent didn't age too well. Well, I've been feeding the flesh, I've been living in sin. My mouth's been running wild and I've been acting like a wild child. So I say this prayer, God, I know you're there. I ain't been playing fair, and I've been only praying when I need your help. I'll sing your praise for all my days. I finally changed, Lord, make your ways my ways. I'll sing your praise for all my days. I finally changed, Lord, make your ways my ways. I've got a Bible in my hands with faded pages and highlighted paragraphs.
Let me just read through the lyrics for you and pay attention to the arc in this story. You see a story of transformation as she writes this. I've got a Bible on my desk with no highlights or creases. Pages are still crisp. I had this idea, Miss Independent. Well, that's who I am. Just watch me excel. I'm falling fast, too fast to catch myself. Miss Independent didn't age too well. I've been feeding flesh. I've been living in sin. My mouth's been running wild, and I've been acting like a wild child. So I say this prayer, God, I know you're there. I ain't been playing fair, and I've only been praying when I need your help. I'll sing your praise for all my days. I've finally changed, Lord. Make your ways my ways. And the song ends, I've got a Bible in my hands with faded pages and highlighted paragraphs. The song is called Change My Ways, and Jennifer Jeffries just sang it on national TV. What a unique voice as well. You know, this almost makes me feel like it's almost like a swelling renaissance in music, like we saw with Oliver Anthony last year, where music is getting absolutely real and raw as opposed to fabricated, fake, and manipulative. So congratulations to Jennifer for this and for making it to the next round of American Idol. Well, that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you are meant to be, and we will see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching today. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it. So do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we would love for you to check out wethefreeshow.com to grab yourself some merch, to spread the word of We the Free. And we're also going to put a video on the screen that we think that you'll like. Now, go and be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.